The reality you believed in is starting to crack. Allegedly, behind the perfectly filtered posts, the effortless Instagram smiles, and those carefully crafted public moments, a much darker story has been quietly unfolding. One built on secrecy, betrayal, and intentional silence. Shekinah has now stepped forward, pulling back the curtain to expose the unfiltered truth about a connection with T.I., a truth that had been buried, distorted, and tightly controlled by those determined to protect perception over authenticity. Earlier leaked footage offered only fragments, brief glimpses of private encounters, intimate exchanges never meant for public eyes, moments that reportedly sparked Tiny Harris' explosive reaction, a confrontation that didn't just stay emotional, but crossed into something far more intense, both physically and symbolically. And still, even as rumors spread and speculation intensified, even as 50 Cent hinted at a documentary that could potentially expose everything, there was no real public fallout. No direct accountability. Not until now. Shekinah has made a deliberate decision to take control of the narrative, to finally reveal what had long been understood behind closed doors. The quiet leverage, the calculated moves, the subtle manipulation, and the fragile alliances that quietly dictated everything, from loyalty to public image. This isn't just surface-level drama. Allegedly, this is something much deeper, a slow unraveling of a system that exposes patterns of control, influence, and moral gray areas. Every look, every move, every silent agreement is now being brought into the light, and this is only the beginning of the fallout. From the outside, the bond between Shekinah and T.I. looked untouchable, a perfect image of loyalty, trust, and composed unity. Every public appearance, every interview, every social media moment was carefully aligned to project stability, a connection that seemed solid, admired, and impossible to shake. Tiny Harris, standing firmly as both protector and authority figure, played a critical role in maintaining that image, presenting herself as someone who enforced respect and ensured that loyalty within her circle was never questioned. And the audience believed it. Fans watched, supported, and accepted the narrative as truth. But beneath that polished surface, a completely different reality was taking shape. Allegedly, the moments kept away from public view tell a story filled with tension, quiet manipulation, and repeated breaches of trust, cracks that slowly weakened the illusion of unity that everyone thought was real. The leaked footage, clips that had circulated before but were never fully explained, began to reveal moments that quietly disrupted the entire narrative. Subtle gestures, hushed conversations, and deeply personal exchanges between Shekinah and T.I. suddenly carried new weight, transforming into pieces of a story the public had only partially seen. What once seemed unclear now started to connect. Tiny Harris' confrontation, where she didn't just speak, but physically stepped in, wasn't just an emotional reaction in the heat of the moment. It felt like the breaking point of something much deeper. Allegedly, this wasn't triggered by one isolated betrayal, but by a build-up, calculated decisions, quiet disloyalties, and repeated lines being crossed over time. That single confrontation, partially caught on camera, didn't just shock viewers, it shattered the illusion of control, exposing cracks that had always existed beneath the surface, just hidden well enough to go unnoticed. Even before that moment erupted, the presence of 50 Cent's rumored documentary had already begun casting a long shadow over everything. Allegedly, the project was expected to dive deep into the dynamic between T.I. and Shekinah, potentially bringing forward private footage and unseen interactions that had remained locked away from public view. During that time, Tiny Harris' silence didn't go unnoticed. Some interpreted it as strategy, a calculated decision to avoid fueling the situation, while others saw it as shock or even hesitation to confront what might come out. Regardless of the reason, that silence created space. And in that space, the narrative continued to evolve without resistance. The balance of power didn't shift dramatically, but it moved just enough to be felt. Without any clear statement, speculation grew stronger, and suddenly, every post, every look, every subtle move was being analyzed through suspicion, as fans tried to piece together what was really happening behind the scenes. Now, Shekinah's choice to finally speak carries undeniable weight. Allegedly, this isn't just about telling her side, it's about taking back control after years of being defined by others. It signals a refusal to stay silent any longer and a deliberate move to reshape the narrative that had been carefully managed for so long. By opening up about her relationship with T.I., including complexities of loyalty, emotion, and personal boundaries, she forces the public to see things differently. What once looked like unwavering loyalty or a flawless bond now appears far more complicated. A layered dynamic built on negotiation, strategy, and conditions that were never visible before. Allegedly, every revealed moment, every exposed interaction, points to a pattern where connection and support existed side by side with influence, leverage, and carefully calculated positioning. Tiny Harris' reaction to the footage was instant and impossible to ignore. Allegedly, it wasn't just emotion taking over. It was both instinct and intention. By confronting Shekinah physically, she wasn't only expressing anger. She was drawing a line, re-establishing control, and reminding everyone of her position within that hierarchy. But this moment wasn't purely reactive. It carried strategy. Every movement, every word spoken, every second of that confrontation sent laid signals, not just to those present, but to the wider audience who would eventually see parts of it unfold. Those watching closely could sense the complexity beneath it all, anger mixed with authority, but also hints of fear, vulnerability, and a calculated effort to maintain dominance. Tiny Harris' response makes one thing clear. Within this world, personal betrayal is never just personal. It's tied to image, perception, and a constant negotiation of power. At the same time, Shekinah's behavior during the confrontation revealed something far more calculated than it appeared on the surface, a careful balance between awareness and restraint. Allegedly, she knew that any reaction, even the smallest one, had the potential to shift public perception, alter existing power dynamics, and either escalate the situation or bring it under control. The way she handled the moment, avoiding unnecessary provocation while remaining composed, points to a deep understanding of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about a confrontation. It was about authority, reputation, and narrative control. Through her controlled responses, the audience catches a glimpse of the survival instinct she's developed over time, a blend of strategic silence, selective transparency, and a constant effort to maintain influence without triggering further fallout. The timing of everything unfolding now is impossible to ignore. The mix of leaked footage, earlier rumors surrounding a possible documentary, and the intensity of the confrontation has created what can only be described as a pressure point ready to explode. Allegedly, what seemed like isolated incidents in the past are now being reinterpreted as part of a consistent pattern. Tiny Harris asserting dominance, Shekinah carefully navigating her position, and T.I. maintaining a presence that appears stabilizing on the surface, but selectively involved when it matters most. Each of them operates within a complicated structure of expectations, loyalty, and calculated risk, where perception holds real value and exposure can ripple far beyond personal relationships, affecting reputation, influence, and public standing. As more of the story comes into focus, the polished image that once defined everything begins to fracture in ways that can't be ignored. Allegedly, what was presented as unity, loyalty, and unquestioned control was never as solid as it seemed. Instead, it was carefully maintained, built through controlled narratives, selective revelations, and the strict enforcement of boundaries behind the scenes. What the public once saw as strength now appears fragile, almost constructed, held together by image management, quiet manipulation, and unspoken agreements. The leaked footage and the confrontation that followed don't feel like random incidents anymore. They look like clear signs of something much deeper. Signals of underlying dynamics that have been operating for a long time, now finally coming into view. The clash between Tiny Harris and Shekinah wasn't just a sudden explosion. It was a visible peak of years of calculated behavior, subtle influence, and tightly controlled interactions. Allegedly, what viewers interpreted as a single act of betrayal was actually the result of repeated patterns, each moment layered with intention, consequence, and an invisible hierarchy that dictated how far anyone could go. Tiny Harris' physical assertion during the confrontation wasn't just emotional, it carried purpose. It functioned as a way to reclaim control in a space where perception defines reality. Every movement, every reaction served a role, reinforcing boundaries, reminding everyone of past lines that had been crossed, and maintaining a system where loyalty, obedience, and alignment were expected without question. Allegedly, Shekinah's role within this entire dynamic was never secure. It was always fragile, constantly shifting under pressure. Her visible loyalty to T.I. and the Harris family operated inside an unspoken system where silence wasn't optional. It was necessary for survival. Public restraint wasn't just expected. It was directly tied to maintaining relevance and influence. The smallest details, subtle glances, carefully chosen words, controlled reactions, became essential tools for navigating an environment where one wrong move could have consequences. The leaked footage, while deeply personal on the surface, exposed something far more complex underneath. A pattern where relationships weren't driven purely by trust or connection, but by leverage, reputation, and a constant balancing act of advantage. Every interaction meant something. Every pause carried intent. And every unspoken rule reinforced a structure designed to quietly control behavior. Over time, these repeated dynamics formed a clear pattern, one built on calculated influence and measured responses. Allegedly, Tiny Harris' reactions weren't random. They escalated in direct response to what she perceived as threats. Even the smallest signs of defiance, moments of closeness taken the wrong way, or boundaries crossed, intentionally or not, set off a chain reaction. Each response served a purpose. Each confrontation reinforced a role, not just as a participant, but as the enforcer, the protector, and the one who ultimately defined the limits. Within this space, love, loyalty, and friendship weren't freely given. They came with conditions. They depended on alignment, adherence to unwritten rules, and the ability to maintain appearances at all costs. The confrontation with Shekinah wasn't an isolated incident. It was simply the latest chapter in an ongoing cycle where authority was constantly challenged, then re-established. The imbalance of power became even more pronounced with T.I. at the center of it all. His presence carried weight, not through constant action, but through calculated restraint. Allegedly, his selective involvement allowed control to exist without direct interference. Publicly, he appeared as a stabilizing force, someone who could mediate and maintain balance. But privately, the pattern suggested something more strategic, stepping in only when necessary, allowing tension to build when it served a purpose, and preserving both influence and image at the same time. By not immediately shutting down Tiny Harris' confrontation, he reinforced the structure itself, quietly signaling what was acceptable, what could be overlooked, and what would ultimately be corrected. In this kind of environment, silence wasn't passive. It was powerful. It acted as a tool, a signal, and a method of maintaining control without saying a word. At the same time, the leaked footage raised the stakes to an entirely different level. Moments that were once private were now being re-examined as evidence, pieces of a much larger puzzle revealing patterns of connection, restraint, and silent negotiation. Tiny Harris' intense reaction, captured in fragments, turned what should have remained behind closed doors into something public and unavoidable. It forced people to confront a difficult contrast, the difference between the image that had been presented and the reality now being exposed. Meanwhile, Shekinah, by choosing to finally speak and shape her own narrative, shifted the balance. What had once been rumors, speculation, and controlled leaks became something intentional, something directed. The story was no longer being told about her. It was being told by her, and in doing so, the past, once carefully hidden, was now fully exposed under the weight of public scrutiny. Within this context, silence was never accidental. It was strategy. Allegedly, every moment of restraint seen in the past was a calculated move designed to protect reputation, prevent escalation, and maintain access to circles of influence. By choosing not to react immediately, Shekinah avoided unnecessary conflict while quietly holding on to leverage, making sure that when she finally spoke, it would carry undeniable impact. At the same time, Tiny Harris' repeated displays of control, combined with T.I.'s carefully measured absence of action, helped reinforce an environment where confrontation, emotion, and authority followed an unspoken script. Every decision, whether to act or remain still, served a purpose: to establish dominance, secure influence, and maintain the structure of an already defined hierarchy. But these patterns didn't stop at personal disagreements. They reflected something much larger. What played out between individuals mirrored a broader system built on perception, image, and calculated leverage. Allegedly, concepts like love, loyalty, and trust weren't just emotional. They functioned as tools, as forms of currency that could be used to gain or maintain control. Every choice carried weight. Every reaction, or lack of it, was interpreted beyond the surface. Compliance signaled alignment, while resistance carried consequences. Tiny Harris' assertive actions, Shekinah's controlled responses, and TI's selective involvement all highlighted a repeating cycle of power dynamics that shaped not only their personal interactions, but their positions within a much larger structure. The leaked footage added another layer to this already complex dynamic. It exposed how strategy often existed beneath emotion. Allegedly, even the most personal moments weren't entirely free of calculation. A simple gesture of closeness could double as leverage. A moment of intimacy might signal alignment, and crossing an unseen boundary, even unintentionally, could trigger a response designed to correct and re-establish order. In this kind of environment, openness was rare, loyalty came with conditions, and emotional expression was carefully monitored. The confrontation itself, intense as it appeared, wasn't out of place. It followed a familiar pattern. It functioned both as a reaction and a message, serving as punishment while also reinforcing hierarchy and making the stakes clear to anyone watching. Ultimately, this part of the story reveals something far more unsettling than a single conflict. The connections between Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. were never just personal. They operated as spaces where influence, control, and strategy intersected with emotion and loyalty. Allegedly, every look, every movement, every exchange played a role in a larger system where power was constantly being negotiated, authority continuously reinforced, and reputation carefully protected. And then came the turning point, the moment where exposure, whether intentional or unexpected, forced everything into the open, leaving no space untouched and no detail hidden from scrutiny. And even beyond that, the situation stretches further than one confrontation could ever explain. The dynamics surrounding Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. exist within a much broader network, an industry environment built on control, perception, and influence. Allegedly, nothing happens in isolation. Every action, every word, every pause has the ability to shift narratives, reshape alliances, and open or close doors of opportunity. Public appearances, social media activity, and media narratives aren't random. They are carefully constructed tools designed to strengthen certain images, bury uncomfortable truths, and reveal only what serves a purpose. In this world, private conflict doesn't stay private. It evolves into something bigger, something that carries consequences far beyond the individuals involved. Allegedly, the system working behind Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. operates like both a shield and a weapon at the same time. Silence isn't just absence, it's used with purpose. And when information is released, it's never random. It's calculated to shape how the public sees everything. Every post, every caption, every subtle message becomes part of a larger narrative design, quietly determining who stays protected, who gets exposed, and who holds a real control. Tiny Harris' earlier decision not to respond to 50 Cent's documentary hints fits perfectly into this pattern. It wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. By staying silent, she preserved a position, delayed public judgment, and ensured that when the story unfolded, it would do so on terms that didn't weaken her influence. Because in this world, exposure itself is power, and whoever controls it ultimately controls the outcome. At the same time, money and branding raise the stakes even higher. Allegedly, deals, partnerships, and audience loyalty aren't built on pure truth. They are built on perception. The industry thrives on carefully constructed images. Loyalty suggests stability, alliances signal strength, and a controlled narrative protects financial value. Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. all exist within this high-pressure ecosystem where nothing is neutral. Conflict isn't just emotional, it's strategic. Silence isn't passive, it's intentional. And when something is finally revealed, it doesn't just affect reputations, it impacts revenue, influence, and long-term positioning. The leaked footage, the confrontation, and Shekinah's eventual decision to speak weren't just personal moments. They became transactions within a system where drama and economics are deeply connected. Behind all of this, there are always others, individuals who help sustain the structure without stepping into the spotlight. Allegedly, people within the inner circle play a key role by choosing when to stay quiet, when to offer selective details, and how to frame events in ways that align with existing power structures. Their silence isn't accidental, it's deliberate. Their presence helps maintain the illusion of unity, even when fractures are clearly forming beneath the surface. Every withheld comment, every carefully worded statement adds to an environment where authority remains intact, missteps are controlled, and exposure is carefully managed. So when the confrontation involving Shekinah unfolded, the system didn't collapse. It adapted. It shifted, amplified the moment, and absorbed the impact while keeping its core structure intact. And then there's social media, the force that magnifies everything. Allegedly, it acts as both an accelerator and a threat. Leaks spread faster, clips circulate instantly, and public reactions build narratives in real time, often before any official response can even be formed. Every move, every silence, every reaction becomes material for analysis. Tiny Harris' restraint, Shekinah's controlled revelations, and T.I.'s selective presence all feed into this constantly evolving digital environment, where perception is shaped moment by moment. Layers of interpretation form instantly. Suspicion grows, opinions divide, and judgment becomes immediate. In this space, nothing stays hidden for long. The line between private and public disappears, and what people believe becomes just as powerful as what actually happened. Allegedly, the looming presence of 50 Cent's T's documentary raises the stakes far beyond ordinary attention. Past silences, calculated maneuvers, and private patterns are suddenly at risk of being broadcast to millions. Every gesture, every hidden interaction, and every long-buried misstep is now open to scrutiny. What was once contained, managed, or controlled is on the verge of becoming public property. The protective mechanisms of the industry, previously sufficient to moderate perception and manage fallout, now confront a force they cannot fully command. The authority of narrative has shifted to those ready to disclose, confront, and expose the truth. The consequences ripple far beyond personal conflict. Allegedly, repeated behaviors in private spaces, assertions of dominance, measured restraint, and conditional loyalty are now reframed under a public microscope. Fans, insiders, and media alike interpret every interaction as evidence of larger dynamics, influence, negotiation, and control. Tiny Harris' assertion of authority, Shekinah's deliberate exposure, and T.I.'s selective silence reveal hierarchies and patterns that transcend personal relationships, shaping not just their private world but signaling the mechanisms governing industry behavior as a whole. Allegedly, the tension between personal drama and structural protection exposes just how fragile curated narratives are. What was once a private confrontation now reverberates outward, destabilizing perception and revealing the mechanisms that govern conduct. Alliances fracture under observation, reputations teeter on interpretation, and the illusion of cohesion slowly crumbles. Every leaked clip, every social media reaction, every headline becomes a vector in this unfolding saga, a reminder that image is currency, silence is strategy, and exposure is both weapon and tool. Ultimately, this part exposes the machinery behind the facade. The confrontation between Tiny Harris and Shekinah, the leaked footage, and Shekinah's public revelation are not isolated events. They illustrate an ecosystem where leverage, influence, and selective disclosure dictate outcomes. Allegedly, narrative control, calculated visibility, and the financial, social, and reputational stakes all converge to manipulate perception, enforce hierarchies, and ensure fallout is inevitable, methodical, and systemic. You are no longer just a spectator. Every detail, every clip, every revelation involving Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. matters, and your attention shapes the narrative itself. The story unfolds in real time, and silence equals complicity. Allegedly, years of control, strategic disclosure, and power plays have governed these relationships. Now, those patterns are exposed, leaving the public to interpret, judge, and respond. Your engagement is part of the mechanism enforcing truth, accountability, and perception. Comment, debate, and dissect every angle. Analyze motives, question timing, and consider the consequences of actions once hidden from view. Each perspective adds context to a story where loyalty, influence, and exposure collide. Likes are more than gestures. They signal awareness. Subscriptions and notifications ensure you witness the unfolding drama as secrets once carefully hidden are forced into the light. Allegedly, this is far more than personal drama. It is a masterclass in manipulation, influence, and the fragility of curated images. The confrontations, the leaked footage, the delayed responses, and the ultimate revelations all demonstrate a broader system where exposure is both threat and tool. Ignoring it allows the machinery of control, image management, and selective revelation to operate unchecked. Observing, questioning, and discussing these events is not optional. It is a responsibility. Do not underestimate the stakes. The fallout between Tiny Harris, Shekinah, and T.I. is ongoing, and your perspective shapes public interpretation of every moment. Engage intentionally, analyze critically, and participate fully. This is your invitation and your warning. Watch, reflect, comment, and subscribe. The story is evolving, and your role in uncovering truth is indispensable.